Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Tier Lists presented by the Game House. I'm Rob, and I'm going to be the one taking you through this latest tier list. As a quick reminder, we have tier lists coming out for Pokemon every single Saturday, so make sure that you are not missing out on these lists. You can go back and check some of the other ones that we have done over the last few weeks, and this one is going to be based off of the first route flying Pokemon. We already did the, normal route, rat type, varmint type Pokemon. This one's going to be just the flying, just the birds. And we've got 11 different Pokemon that we will be going over today. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any more Pokemon content. And make sure to like if you end up enjoying this video. Even if you don't, it helps a lot. So definitely would appreciate it. Along with that, let me know in the comments section below where you believe these Pokemon are going to end up getting listed. We always love to hear your opinions, and we'll respond in kind. But we're going to move on here because we're going to be going through this. I'm going to give you guys kind of a quick breakdown of how we do things, especially when we're doing these Pokemon rankings. We put them into 4 categories, and then we try to, get the average of those, and it's based on design, their stats, their moves, and their usefulness. The usefulness is left open to interpretation. That does include their later evolutions. Maybe we'll do a tier list for that if you guys would like that. As always, let us know. But we took these 11 Pokemon that you can catch early game, all the flying types. We almost didn't put Wingull in there, but we were going to put Spearow in there, so we felt, well, you kind of got to put Wingull if you're going to put Spearow in there. So those are the 2 extras on this list, if you want to call them that. And yeah, I guess I'll just read them off to you real quick. We have Pidgey, Spearow, Hoothoot, Taillow, Wingull, Starly, brain farted, Pidove, Fletchling, Pikipek, Rookidee, and Wattrel. So this is all the way up through Gen 9. Eventually we'll get Gen 10 stuff, but, maybe we'll make a new list at that point. But we're going to start, as we always do, at the bottom of C. As a reminder, we have Arceus and Garbodor tier, but we're going to start at the bottom of C, and that's going to be Pidove from Gen 5, Black and White, leading us off here. And look, Pidove is an interesting Pokemon, right? Like, it's obviously based off of the dove, the pigeon, from New York, and that's where Unova is supposed to be based. And for our ranking, this was our lowest one in terms of design, and it's not that it's a bad design, it's just that compared to the rest of these, it's the least memorable. It's the one that stands out the least. It's a very basic Pokemon, I guess, in the sense that it fills its role as an early game type of Pokemon. I don't know, I guess it does that well, but that's really about it when it comes to design. It's actually in the middle when it comes to statistics, and we felt that its moves were nothing special, and it wasn't that we were only going to rank Pokemon like Wattrel and Wingull, who have different typings, better. It's just that even like the different flying moves that it had, and the other, if you want to call them supporting moves, outside of just the typings that it had, just weren't very good, and the usefulness of a Tranquil compared to a lot of these other Pokemon was just sort of low. This Pokemon was sort of low, and it was there, right? Like, it wasn't bad, it just was there. And so unfortunately, Pidove had to get ranked at the bottom of the C tier list, not all the way in Garbodor tier list because of its stats mostly, but it still just was not able to make it past this part. Moving on, we have Starly. Gen 4 people, don't get mad at me. There's a few reasons why for Starly, but for starters, again, design-wise, look, the gray and the black and the white are a thing. You can see it through a lot of these different Pokemon, but they just don't stand out. Staraptor is a solid Pokemon, though. It's a good physical attacker. It's got good speed. It's a good Pokemon. It's not better than some of these. I would say the majority of these other, later game evolutions for these Pokemon, but it's not bad. It's just a relatively forgetful design. And what really hurts Starly is it actually has the worst stats by a pretty good margin other than one other Pokemon. There's, I believe, 17 points between it and the second or the third worst Pokemon, because it's tied with another one on this list that's ranked a little bit higher. But statistically, it is technically the worst Pokemon. Its moves do not help it at all. They're not terrible moves, but again, it's nothing that really stands out for this Pokemon in particular. We do not, by the way, consider the moves for the other Pokemon in this category, like for its evolutions. The moves are just for these Pokemon. We only consider all the rest of the, moves and evolutions and stuff in the usefulness category. So it just didn't rank very highly. It was pretty much consistently in the bottom 3 or 4 in almost every single category. Thus, it ended up here in C. Next, we have Taillow. You can probably see a little bit of a theme here. Taillow didn't do too bad in terms of design, and its usefulness, obviously, as a Swellow, wasn't too bad. The kicker here, and the reason why it is, I apologize, I actually misplaced this. This is supposed to be in the bottom of B tier. Forgot about that. Taillow is in the bottom of B tier. Apologies, because it still didn't do well design or usefulness-wise, realistically. But moves, it was better than the two below it, for sure. It was better than a few other Pokemon. Its flying moves in particular were pretty solid overall. Getting Wing Attack early, getting Aerial Ace, even getting Quick Guard, Air Slash. It does get Brave Bird, even Reversal, Endeavor. Like, those are solid moves for this Pokemon, without a doubt, even without it having to evolve. But what really carried it and pushed it up to the very bottom of B tier was its stats. It's actually got the 4th best stats. We talked about where Starly was. Starly having 245 stats, combined. Taillow had 270. So very high in terms of its ability to, be a useful early game Pokemon. I think it helps that it doesn't have a middle evolution. So that's probably part of the reason why, but it was good enough for it to find its way here. And the only thing I can ever think of when I see this Pokemon is the little bird that Asta has from the anime Black Clover. It feels like that bird was literally just made as a Taillow. I don't know which one technically came first, because I don't know when the manga for Black Clover started, but I do know that the anime came later, so it feels like they almost based that bird on Taillow. But I personally think the design is pretty good and think it was rated a little low, but again, that's only in comparison to these Pokemon, which I think there are a lot of really solid ones here, without a doubt. Next is going to be a very controversial one, and it's, again, because of all the different Pokemon that it's being compared to, but Pidgey. This one hurt for me in particular because Pidgeotto is one of my favorite Pokemon. I think just being, at the beginnings of Pokemon made it very easy for me to love Pidgeotto, and the one that Ash had. Even though it didn't win all the time, it was still a really cool Pokemon for him to get, especially early on. It was there, it was always around. It wasn't one of the stars, but it did its job. So a little sad to see it do this, but the design for Pidgey is so iconic that it did rank in the top 5 in terms of design. Its moves as well really aren't too bad. Getting Twister, a dragon move, was actually a really big deal. And I know it had Twister when it was a flying move. They changed it to a dragon move and they kept it. That really helped a lot. Getting Feather Dance. It got Wing Attack a lot later than some of these other Pokemon, so that didn't help. But it also was able to, once you got past, 30, well, pretty much once you got past 30, when it should have evolved into Pidgeot, I think that would be like 36. But once you get into the 30s, this thing's getting Wing Attack, Roost, Tailwind, Aerial Ace, Air Slash, and Hurricane. So while it struggles a little bit early on, once you get to a certain point, this Pokemon's getting a lot of really good moves. The only big problem, and again, its usefulness, very useful. Pidgeot, especially with its Mega form, really helped it. The problem was, statistically, it was one of the lowest ones, with only 251 total stats. Obviously, it's because it has a middle evolution, but that is what ended up pushing it down here into the B tier instead of in the A tier, at least in my mind. The next one is interesting. Rookidee. Rookidee was either first in a category or basically last. It ended up getting number 1 in our design, and I think because the mask, the colors, just the almost derpiness of the Pokemon to a certain degree as well, while having that cool factor. Rookidee is very great in that regard. Also, the usefulness of it getting Steel type later on was just crazy good, right? When you're basically getting a Skarmory at the beginning of the game, that's just something that's hard to beat, and made it easily the most useful of all of these Pokemon here. The big problem is that its moves are awful. I mean, truly awful. While Power Trip can be useful at times, its only really good flying moves it gets are Pluck and Drill Peck. It does eventually get Brave Bird, but that's really about it. It does not get very much. The intent of this Pokemon is for it to evolve. I know that's how all these are, but I mean, it really did not get much help in the move department. Along with that, statistically, it is tied for the worst with Starly at 245. I believe that this Pokemon was nerfed because of how strong Corviknight is, but it's unfortunate for Rookidee for sure, because it definitely kept it down in this ranking. I personally would have loved to have seen it get a little bit higher as well, but hey, we had to follow, the parameters that we had set, and it ends up here in the B tier. We've got one more Pokemon in B tier, and that's going to be Wingull. Now, Wingull, design-wise, finished kind of near the middle of the pack, lower middle of the pack, so not really too bad there, but it did well in just about everything else. Moves was also one of its more middle of the pack ones. It does get Water Pulse, Water Gun, right, Air Slash, Hurricane, and Roost, but its flying moves were just okay. Wing Attack and Air Slash really are the only ones that you're going to use for the most part. You might use Hurricane later on, but it gets that at such a high level. And along with that, its usefulness is pretty good. Pelipper is a pretty strong Pokemon. The only problem is that it's the only Pokemon on this entire list that has a quadruple effectiveness by electricity. So that certainly did not help this Pokemon whatsoever. But luckily, statistically, it was really good. It was 270, which is one of the highest. So while its design and its moves kind of kept it down, the usefulness and the stats moved it up and made it very close to getting into the A tier. But the 3 Pokemon that we have in the A tier were very, very... They were near the top in almost every single stat, so it was really hard not to put these guys up here. And we'll continue on now into this A tier, and we're going to start with Wattrel. Wattrel's a pretty good Pokemon. It is the newest entry into this list. It gets the Flying and Electric typing, which is really, really strong. Wattrel obviously is a pretty solid Pokemon as well. This one isn't necessarily even like an early game Pokemon to some degree, but it is the supposed to be early game bird Pokemon of Gen 9. It is very strong. Statistically, it was the number 1 with 280, so a full 35 point difference between the lowest 2 in Rookidee and Starly. Its moves are really solid. They could have been a little bit better. It surprisingly only gets 2 electric moves in Thundershock and Spark, but it does get good flying moves along with that, with Pluck, Roost, Dual Wing Beat. Sorry, I misspoke. It does get Volt Switch and Discharge later on as well, so that is what helped it out, but the flying moves were part of what kept it down, but it at least gets Pluck and Dual Wing Beat, but it still wasn't enough to really push it towards the very top, but it was a top 5 Pokemon in terms of moves, stats. Its design as well is really good, right? It make you feel like it's this seabird without a doubt, but with the little bit of electric, not just the yellow that is on the design itself, but even just the jagged edges of its front feathers really helps this Pokemon, and it came to life, I think, pretty well with the 3D model. what did lower it was usefulness. Again, Wattrel, not a bad Pokemon whatsoever, but there are some pretty solid Pokemon that are very useful, that have a history of being very useful on this list, and that have a history of, I think they'll be ones that are even more remembered, more memorable. I just don't really see that many people talking about Wattrel. I know one of the protagonists, I'm pretty sure it's one of the protagonists in the new Pokemon anime, has one of these Pokemon as well. So, maybe that will change moving forward. But for right now, at least for us and, some of us older heads like myself, this Pokemon ended up at the bottom of A tier. The next one's Pikipek. And look, like, Trumbeak is no joke. Or Toucannon, sorry. Toucannon is no joke. That is a really solid, really strong Pokemon. I know it's normal flying, but it hits like a truck. It's got great moves later on, so it was very high ranking on the usefulness. The design is really good as well. A woodpecker design, I think did a lot, and the red in this Pokemon I think really stood out significantly. It helps you feel like it's a woodpecker. It helps you, I don't know, like, along with the beak and everything. It just was a fun design. It wasn't a top design. It was in the top 5, but it wasn't like near the very top. It was, a 4 basically out of the 11. So, people, received it well. Statistically, it was pretty much directly in the middle with 265. It was the only one of all of these Pokemon to have that stat. But its moves are really good as well. It gets Rock Smash. It's the only one in this that gets a fighting move that early. It gets Pluck. It ends up getting Drill Peck, Bullet Seed even later on, and Hyper Voice. This Pokemon had very unique, very different types of moves that could make it extremely useful. And getting fighting and grass moves for any of these Pokemon is very interesting and very helpful, and allows it to be a lot more useful against different Pokemon, which is why it ranked so highly. We are down to the bottom, or to our next 3. There are, how I like to do this is I like to do the Garbodor tier first, and then I will let you guys know the last ones that will be in A and in Arceus. So, at the bottom, it's going to be Spearow. Now, this is maybe going to end up being controversial, but Spearow's just so often overshadowed by Pidgey. I think that really hurt. Its design isn't bad. It's not a bad design. It's just not great either. It's not super memorable. It was near the bottom of the list. Statistically, it wasn't too bad either with 262, but its moves are just really not very good. It gets Aerial Ace and Wing Attack early on, but like its best move ends up being Drill Peck. There are a lot of Pokemon with better, later moves than that. Along with that as well, it's just a Pharaoh might be the most or the least useful Pokemon of all of these, especially in its final form. You just don't see it very often. It's pretty bulky, and I think part of the reason why it ended up down here is because, it attacked freaking Ash at the very first episode of Pokemon, so it didn't necessarily leave a good taste in people's mouths when maybe it was being ranked, but it is unfortunately in the Garbodor tier. It was close between it and Pidove and Starly. They were all fairly close, which is why those two ended up in the C tier list, but I think that, again, the fact that it gets overshadowed by Pidgey in just about every way, whether it's moves or stats, even its design, I think people like a little bit better. It's the only Hawk-like Pokemon amongst this group, so you could have moved it up or down a little bit more based on the design, but it ended up being down here in the Garbodor tier list, which leaves us with our 2 last Pokemon for A and for Arceus tier. And I'm going to do them at the same time as always. It's going to be Hoothoot in the A tier, and Fletchling, I'm sure not a huge surprise to a lot of people, in the Arceus tier. And I'm going to explain why. I'll start with Hoothoot. Hoothoot is really good. It's a unique design. The fact that it stands on one foot and then, goes back and forth on them. It's got, the hands of a clock for its eyes. It really stands out. It helped, and I know that people said this as well, that, Ash ended up having a shiny Noctowl, his first shiny Pokemon. Maybe his only shiny Pokemon, if I can remember correctly. But at least his first, for sure. That really stood out. But not only did the design do really well, it didn't... I guess I'll hit the bottom parts. It didn't do super well statistically. It was 262, so it was like near the bottom of the mid levels, but its usefulness helped to push it up. Its design helped to push it up, but it was its moves that were so good. It gets Echoed Voice, Confusion, Reflect, Defog, Air Slash, Extrasensory, Roost, Hypnosis, Dream Eater, and then a big one that got added later on was Moonblast. I did not remember or probably know, that this Pokemon got Moonblast. That is crazy. That is such a great move for this Pokemon to have. It gets some great flying moves, some solid flying, some great psychic moves, some solid flying moves, and a really good fairy move on top of it. So that really helped to push it up, and it almost made it into the Arceus tier. But guys, look, Fletchling is clearly the best of these. Talonflame is, since it's not the most useful because of Corviknight, it's right there. It is right behind it. Talonflame is so good. It was used competitively for so long. It's a really good Pokemon. I've come to really love it through Pokerogue, and I'm not a big Sun and Moon fan, so I want this to be shown that even though I crap a lot on Gen 4 and Gen 7, there are things about those games that I do like. They're just my least favorite overall. It doesn't mean they're bad games, they're just not as good as some of the other ones to me. But this Pokemon stands out to me, no doubt about it. It was only middle of the middle tier for design by itself. I do think it looks a little bit plain, and if it didn't have the big orange, letting us know, like kind of teasing us that the fire type is coming, I do think it'd actually be near the bottom in terms of design, because it is a little bit basic looking, right? There's not too much that stands out. It feels like these two Pokemon down here, but that splash of orange helped to move it towards a little bit more towards the middle. But statistically, it was second. It was only 2 points behind Wattrel at 278. Again, usefulness was right there, and its moves are really solid, right? You're getting Ember, you're getting the Peck, Quick Attack, Acrobatics, Aerial Ace, Steel Wing as well, and it learns Fly on its own at level 50. A lot later, but still, it's got solid moves, and again, as you go on in the game, getting things like Flame Charge and Brave Bird and all these other things just make this line really special, really good, and it's going to be interesting to see if Gen 10 can top it, because for right now, Fletchling is truly top tier. I struggled to see any other of these Pokemon really getting higher than it, and I think that if I ended up having to rank, the final evolutions, it would be right there with Corviknight, and that would be kind of a battle between those two to see which ones would end up on top. You can see Rookidee unfortunately got held back pretty significantly, but the fact that this Pokemon has such high stats, even with a middle evolution, right, is really impressive. You can see that some of the Pokemon that ranked higher statistically, right, like these, like Hoothoot, Wingull, Wattrel, right, like they all only have one extra evolution. The fact that this Pokemon has 2 more and is as good as it is just insane, to be honest with you. So we hope that you've enjoyed this. I specifically do. Please let me know in the comments below if you feel like we missed anything, if you think that these rankings are super wrong. Always happy to hear you guys out, especially if it's constructive, right? If it's just you're bad, then, well, there's not much I can say to that one. But I really do hope that you guys have enjoyed this. I really enjoyed doing this tier list. This one was a lot more fun than the Rodent one, in my opinion, or the Varmin one, I think is the way they do it on Pokemon. But that is going to wrap it up for us on this episode. So with that, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.